Alright, hi guys, welcome to the semifinals of Health Science Debate Open 2015. Congrats to both teams for making it to the semifinals. Yeah. Surprise. In government, we have NTU Squadron, and in opposition, we have WSDC, ENA. Without further ado, invite Prime Minister to start debate. Here.
In order to have this clear, we need to understand a couple of things clearly. When it comes to any court process, we have a judge who considers multiple factors that has led you to commit the crime. The criminal justice system has never been about single factors and singular instances why you have committed a crime. I'm going to explain to you why that principle of the having mitigating factors it can be extended to this particular at the end of it. But we need to have a clear setup in this thing. Before that, we need to come up with a couple of assumptions. One clear assumption. Firstly, it is reasonable to assume from government side that the crime gene exists and it can be detected by the people, so that's not going to be the debate at the end of the day. But let's give more context to this. We need to understand the other factors that the judges already consider as mitigating factors. For example, when it comes to family circumstances, right? For example, when it comes to the victim, that the impact that has been done to the victim as a result of the crime that has been committed. More important, in other instances, just because of your position inside the society and your social utility that you have to society, they give you different punishment than the other people. Not just give you different punishment objectively, they allow the judge to consider that particular factor to give you and assign you a different punishment. For instance, if you are a doctor, we are not going to lock up you 24/7 inside the prison, but we would allow you and allow the people to enjoy your services. If you are the sole income provider of your family at the end of the day, we do consider that factor, and we do not deprive your family from being fed at the end of it. We need to understand why do we have mitigating factors. Firstly, because we understand that some people might be less culpable than the other people within the same scenarios and the same circumstances that they face. That's why we consider all, the family circumstances, or in some issues, we consider the ability of one particular person to get angry faster in comparison to the other people. We don't send them to prison, but we send them to anger management class. Second, we need to understand when it comes to the justice system and considering mitigating factor, that's what is in the best interest of the society and how best the justice system can provide justice to society, which I'm going to explain to you in my second argument. And lastly, I'm going to talk to you about the third concept is the likelihood of reoccurrence. I'm going to talk about why the likelihood of reoccurrence is going to be further less likely to happen under our paradigm if we just from the traditional forms of punishment again. Before I move on to the first argument, this is a characterization of how genetic predisposition can be considered a mitigating factor.
So, how will society view me if they inherently believe that evil is inherent to my character and I cannot control it, and therefore I'm being getting mitigated because I couldn't control my evil? How does recidivism work there? See, there's the very same reason that the society do not consider you a criminal if you live in Parliament or you are a poor person. That means that society is actually capable of rationalizing different factors at the end of it. Joining a pool, what you do for living is a petty crime, or just like different vulnerable society. More important, I think in order for us to understand how genetic works, we need to realize having a crime gene does not necessarily make you a criminal, right? We have so many other genes that do not define us at the end of it. But to some extent, there are factors with your lifestyle and the environment that you live in that would trigger those genes to come and express themselves.
So when it comes to mitigating factors, why do we have it? Because we understand that there are a combination of factors that affect your feeling. So the moment that your capacity as an individual to fully rationalize based on your capacity and your feeling is mitigated by other circumstances and other factors, we do consider that in the court of law. For instance, all the examples that I gave. Let's go through a scenario of why this particular instance is important. We told you your genetics define your capacity to manage your life.
Yeah.
If one particular person, for example, poor person A and poor person B, they are both neighbors in a very bad neighborhood that they are living next together. They have the same job, but person A is more capable of managing his life just because of his genes. But person B is less capable of managing his life. So due to the stress and the environment he lives in, he is more easily triggered to commit that particular crime that he has to do that. We think that's something that we need to consider at the end of the day. The other example is simple. For example, if you put a person who's contaminated by HIV in a room, it's more likely for that particular person to contaminate everyone else in the room. But in comparison, if you put someone in the same room who does not have HIV, so he's not going to contract any other person inside that particular room. In conclusion, I think irrespective of the outcome, it is unethical and abhorrent for the criminal justice system to criminalize you and not to consider the mitigating factor that we're going to have at the end of the day. Within the underpinning principle of justice system, we can ask perfectly to ask your intentions and ask everything and to be as inclusive as possible to come up with proportional punishment.
Yeah.
You have to be more inclusive to be more proportional just. Second argument. How do we change the impacts of the law? We think in some cases, right, that we have, and people do commit crimes, right? It's not because they don't remember, it's not because they don't understand, it's because the circumstances. You already understand that we don't send to jail, right? So we have been trying to evolve and move on from the usual traditional that objectively we impose and assign to all the other people. The other example could be anger management argument that I told you. So when it comes to this particular instance, we should not just randomly send you to jail without having an assessment that what led you to be a criminal. We should put you in circumstances that makes it harder for you and incapacitate you further to be able to respond to those circumstances more rationally, to be able to go through some training, to be able to respond and control your genes and the way that you act inside society better and better. So the sort of rehabilitation that does it good to society is better under our paradigm at the end of the day. Even more than we need to consider chemical medical treatments to control the test controls or hormones that are being produced by your genes. In conclusion, I think if science one day comes up with a form of technology that suppresses your criminal gene to any way express himself, we would happily take that. But unfortunately, at the moment, that technology does not exist. And this gene is leading to people and affecting free will. We think we need to think about justice system. That's the only fair thing.
All right, we thank the Prime Minister. Next, we invite Leader of Op to the opposition, please.
We're so relieved that you agree with us that a genetic disposition is never a precursor to action. But with that being said, at any given point of your life, you have an equal amount of access as anyone else to society's collective pool of morality. And at any point that you decide to violate the access to that collective morality at the expense of another person, regardless of your needs, regardless of the spectrum of circumstances that could affect that decision, you make a decision on something, and we're not happy that you went away. We're happy to be hard for the collective morality of society. And I think it's in your interest if the state has a strong message to its people that the criminal gene, the criminal gene is not a precursor for your crime. In that way, people are more likely to see you less as an uncontrollable monster, and this is going to help recidivism. So these two things in my speech, but first, before we get to establish what the principle of a mitigating factor is. Because remember, very important principle in debate is we debate on what is true, rather we debate on what should be true. So yes, there is a broad spectrum of constituencies in the world that practice different standards of mitigating factors. Some of these mitigating factors, like poverty mitigation, we don't agree with. Some of them are good, some of them are mitigating factors that should be, some of them are mitigating factors that shouldn't be, whatever. There's a broad spectrum of them. And we don't think it's our job to adjudicate between each individual one. However, broadly speaking, there are two cases in which make all mitigating factors principle play. Only if these caveats are filled to be brought anybody, no matter where they are. The two that will provide you is control and two, no utility. Control, when you commit something, when you have control over your actions in that instance, it means you didn't have criminal intent. It means you aren't a criminal, and you shouldn't be sent to a place that criminals are sent. The second part of utility is when the rehab of prisons is tailor-made to solve your criminal tendencies. So if you don't have the intent, if you have no control of your action, and you're not a criminal, no thank you, then it probably isn't very practical, no thank you, or utilitarian to send you to a place that treats criminals. Further, it might even be counterproductive to send someone who is not a criminal to a place filled with criminals, to which extent he might come out and become a criminal. No thank you. So this is like automatism. You hurt someone because of an impulse control, that wasn't because you had some malicious tendency to cause harm. It wasn't because you were acting out of self-trust or you were violating the pool of morals that I've laid out. It was because you did something that your body couldn't prevent. And so as a result, you're not a criminal. There is no practicality, no thank you, to sending you to a place where criminals get treated, knowing that you don't have a problem and you don't need to get treated. Therefore, given this metric, what we have to do on side opposition is prove that the criminal gene doesn't mean you had no control, and it doesn't mean you have no utility. And if you can prove this, it means that mitigation factor is unjust for criminal gene. Sir.
Criminal gene doesn't make you a criminal. Essentially reduces your autonomy in decision making. It makes it difficult for you to make an alternative decision. Why? Because we already been in prison. Mitigate the sentence, not the guilt. Why is that not okay? Why is it that a judge should make this decision?
Okay, great. We're getting into this first idea. I'll respond to that now. Was there control? Because we concede at any given time, there are a variety of factors that affect your vision, and particularly called the bad one. Yeah, you could work at standing out of grown up conservative community that told you rape is all women's fault, and this upbringing could be playing in your head. Don't like yes, you could have an aggressive gene, given the wide map of genes that everybody has. Yeah, you could have an aggressive tendency or a warrior that can cause you to make a decision. But all of this is true in Bharat's speech, but juxtaposes the fact that in that instance, even with all these external influences, at any given time, you still have access to society's collective rule of morals more than someone with autism or someone who's rule of morality does. Because you knew black from white, but chose to violate it anyway, that's your crime. And it should be a crime, and it shouldn't be regarded as something that can be mitigated. Because first of all, in our investigation, sometimes things are premeditated. So if someone planned through a crime and he was proven to have the gene and mitigating, we think that's ridiculous. Because he planned the crime and it was incredibly malevolent. But even if it wasn't experimental, they failed to exercise self-control. In Bharat's speech, he said, wait, they couldn't handle the circumstances. Exactly. That was the failure on your part. You couldn't handle the circumstances and did something other people would not have done. That means you have violated the same access you had to the collective rule of grounds as everybody else. As a result, there was control, at least to a greater extent, and in other cases of insanity. Secondly, let's talk about utility. Was there utility? Before I get into that, yes.
There was greater control that is almost there was less control than a person who does not have genetic predisposition. Why can we not account for that difference in control by rating partially?
Gemma, the funny thing in Bharat's speech in your case is this. You said the criminal must act in tandem with all of these other external influences for you to consider. So person A, person B, one lives in Harlem, one doesn't. This one has criminal gene, and therefore all these other circumstances suddenly become more pertinent. We want to ask you the question: if all else equal, ceteris paribus, these two people we had the same amount of external influences. By virtue of you being pretty consistent, you will obviously make the guy with the gene like mitigated, right? And we think at that point, that's when you discriminate between someone with a gene and not. If Baranski's told you the gene is a determinant of action, if you don't want to think the fact that genes make you, then you cannot that you won't make this that it should be mitigated. So let's talk about utility. Because you committed a criminal act, you should receive criminal rehab. Prison is suited for this because it has things like increased community service, all sorts of things to remove criminal tendencies. You are not insane. You have some autism. Actually, so you should go to a place that treats you for being a criminal. We think in that sense, it's better for you when you come out, because if society feels that this is a gene that prison cannot fix, and this is something that we can do nothing about, recidivism is going to suck for you, because people will always see you as an inherently evil that is genetically going to harm me. I am never going to sit next to Mithran as long as I know Mithran is a genetically criminal. There's no responsibility for his actions. We say, don't mix this. If you tell me, yes, there are so many circumstances, but at any point, you are a person, and your genes and your circumstances don't make you who you are, and you have responsibility to control. That's when society is more likely to have you, and that's when we get better citizens. At the end of this, the things that it doesn't qualify for impact. But this is an information. You are not your gene.
All right, we thank the leader of OP. Next, we invite Deputy Prime Minister. Okay.
Let's be incredibly clear about the logical extension of the principle of the opposition. If you get cancer, part because you had genetic predisposition towards it, it's your fault. You should have done something differently and did it. Accordingly, why would we offer you the same treatment as somebody else? Secondly, the fact that you are gay and have a genetic predisposition to potentially be attracted to one gender or another, inherently, you'll make a wholly independent choice to reject that part of your identity. Here's where they went wrong in the last debate. Here's where they went wrong in this debate. There is something in between whole-scale mitigation of your guilt for the crime and ignoring the factors that make it more difficult for you to do different action than committing a crime. And that's precisely why we believe the principle of factors. So I want to start there. Do we accept that these people had wrong? No, and we never contended, we never made that argument. We agree that people are in a position where they literally could not have done anything different because, for example, physical reality or self-defense, or the fact that they are whole-scale insane should be mitigated from guilt. That is different, e.g. acquitting someone of a crime is different than recognizing when you give them a sentence that they ought to serve less time because they were less culpable than a comparable circumstance or a comparable person. Here's where they went wrong. They said, if you're willing to accept that they both perhaps face poverty, why is it that you would not treat them the same? Because facing poverty is one thing that might make it less easy for you to avoid crime. But a compounding factor is that your genetics predispose you towards behavior in a particular way, which means when faced with two sets of alternatives, you are more likely to choose criminal one than non-criminal one. Let's be clear about what a genetic predisposition means. It doesn't mean you are evil. Importantly, it doesn't mean that you reject the morality of society. It means that in all likelihood, the genes in your body trigger chemicals in your brain to produce more testosterone, for example, which make you more aggressive, which means when faced with the same situation as somebody else who isn't aggressive and does not have the same amount of testosterone in their body, you are more likely to respond violently. That doesn't mean you agree that violence is good. It doesn't mean you reject the principles of society that says killing is wrong. By virtue of your composition, you are less capable of opting out of the criminal course of action than someone who does not face that same genetic predisposition. That's the key thing that they actually concede to when they suggest that there are certain factors we ought to recognize. We should argue about what ought to be and not what it is. We believe the system's fundamental aim to amount of control you have and therefore the confidence you have in committing a crime, which is the reason to differentiate between manslaughter and murder. If one of those two crimes is the same, because you recognize your culpability is different, because in one case you intended to commit the crime, and in one case you didn't intend to commit the crime. We still punish you for the fact that a bad thing occurred as a result of your actions, but we punish you differentially because of these things that you're making the decision to commit that crime. We would point to the fact that as a mitigating factor, because in this case, you had less intent because you were not as capable of doing something different than somebody else. To be clear, this is like what we call nuance in debating, right? It doesn't mean that you had no alternative choice. In the same way that a poor person could go hungry instead of stealing food. In the same way that they could wait longer and attempt to find a job. In the same way that they could walk further and attempt to beg. There are many alternative courses of action. Having a genetic predisposition towards crime makes you less responsible for picking the action that is criminal than somebody who did not have that predisposition. That is something the court ought to account for. Actually, go ahead, Nishan, I'll take you right now.
You always have the option of whether to commit crime or whether to not. If you're saying that a person committed the crime and you punish them, but you mitigate them, but wait, let's be soft line, not mitigate them that much because they're still guilty, are you then conceding that they aren't really that guilty for their gene, but rather for other circumstances?
15 seconds, chat. Okay, let's be clear. They are partially guilty as a result of their gene. Like, what is unclear about this? In the same way that somebody who is starving is less culpable for stealing bread, but otherwise purchased bread, but stole bread for the sake of fun, or stole bread because they wanted to make the life of somebody who is selling it worse. Because the intent in those cases is different, and the harm as a result of that is different. So we think principally, I'm going to move on from this, because the debate's really explicitly about this. It is clear that when you have less control, you want less to determine how much your genetics played a factor. Negative takers are not any factor, or a judge who can listen to medical testimony, people in the profession who can talk about the influence your genes had on the course of action that you took. They will probably hear that in a sentencing hearing, and they make a decision. In the same way that a judge right now accounts for the fact that a victim expresses in a hearing, that accounts for the fact that you said in a hearing is unclear by the difference in income. It does not account for, therefore, a difference in sentencing that is completely and fair. Because the alternative is that you punish these two individuals the same, and one of them was more likely to get a crime from birth. I mean, they had no choice about it. They could not opt out of having that gene. And you penalize someone for being born in a particular way that is whole scale unfair. So moving on from that, let's talk about the implications of this policy. We tell you that put someone in jail to see that it has any rehabilitative function. The reason it does is because it is like they did and makes them recognize that society condemns. The only reason ever be effective at rehabilitating someone is if they committed a crime because they reject the morality or they do not recognize what they did is wrong. Somebody who commits a crime that is motivated by a genetic predisposition towards, for example, violence, does not reject the morality of society. They do not need to be convinced of what they did is wrong. They had a physical incapacity potentially acting in a different way, or it was more difficult for them to act in a different way. It would be more effective as a society if we recognise that reality and actually treated that thing, which Barrett tells you, which gets no engagement. Perhaps instead of putting these people in jail for an additional 3 years, which is essentially what we're talking about, or an additional 5 years for a few months, we should treat the genetic predisposition. We should give them management techniques, like, for example, hormone therapy, like, for example, giving them anger management and other things that might allow them to minimise the expression of the genetic predisposition that they were unfortunately born with. We think this actually protects society more. But the outcome of their principle, if utilitarianism was the only thing that the criminal justice system ought to care about, would be that they would go out there into society and lock up anyone who was statistically more likely to commit a crime. The reason we don't do that, even though it is most futile, because it affects people, is because all questions of criminal justice, your right to not victim, your right not to not actually freedom. We think if you were put in a way where you could not do something different, or it was more difficult for you to act differently, it would be absolutely unacceptable for us to value the potential threat that you might pose to society over your right to be free. That's the reason we're very, very proud to propose this policy.
Thank the Deputy Master. Next, we invite Deputy Leader Paul. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, a variety of genes that an individual has. We agree that some of those genes could lead you to a more aggressive tendency or the capacity to exert that. But that does not mean you did not have control over. We in that argument, Mr. Speaker, there is no such perfect control. Even if genes are somehow inclined to one or the other, you should have the capacity to do it. It might be hard. It is something that you have to overcome. Same way, for an individual has to overcome the threat of hunger and he has to not commit a crime because it's illegal. We think that it's the same thing and every individual should be able to do it. Anyway, genetics is the same as every other substance you go through in a normal life. Therefore, we think it's not a compounding factor. You should. But the first question we must ask is this age justified? And second of all, it's very simple. If you have no control, but there's a utility to put you in prison, we will not mitigate it. But if there's no utility in putting you, but you deserve it, you will do it anyway. One or the other, we think they do measures today. Now, this thing was there are social positions in which you don't send drug at jail in status quo. That's true, but it should not be true. Individuals of high status or they're more important to society, that does not mean you should not send to prison. Unacceptable if you're a drug addict and just because you have heroin addiction and it's chemical in your brain, that doesn't mean you can active and purchasing more drugs. You just anyway, because we can rehabilitate you as well. But we should send you to jail for accessing those things, to acting on the addiction and acting on the harm. But the second question she said was, is it a compounding factor? Because assuming there are two scenarios that are exactly the same, a poor individual on one side is a G, but the other person does not, his ability to access reality or alternatives is lesser on the other side. That's what they argue. We said that's not true. If indeed you can see that genes is not beyond an adult person, but pushes you to pick one or the other, that means there's some semblance of control. And so long there's some semblance of control, we think external factors dictate the way you make decisions. Because genes don't cloud your capacity to react. Genes don't change your alternatives. Don't change your reality on the ground. So we think it's as lucrative for a poor person with a gene to steal as it is for a person who does not have the gene. So we think even if indeed it is harder for you to access one reality, a person with a gene, it does not mean you should not because of the pool of morality that none of you guys. But the third thing she said was, well, the control is lesser than the average individual. There is some mitigation. We said it's not true. We said the person with a predisposition to commit violence is the same as any other individual in society. We actually argue that there are different reasons why people are violent. It might not be genetic, it might just be that you were born up in a house where you had to act violently whenever you were a kid. We think people have to suffer all the time, but that does not mean that you not having full control does not mean you have some control, and therefore we think so long as rationality is across individuals and the same access to the, even if it's hard with the speaker, you should have to do it anyway, because the punishments or the deterrents are the same to every individual. And the deterrent for you not to act is exactly the same. Therefore, we think the calculus that goes into making the decisions is exactly the same. It's not cancer, it's not engaging. There's no moral compass against having cancer or having engaging. You couldn't not opt out of cancer, you couldn't not opt out of being gay. You couldn't opt out of not acting violently. Even if it's less likely, Mr. Speaker, you should not be mitigated for it. But sure, genes are not an ethereal concept. They have physiological outcomes, like greater levels of particular hormones that might make it harder for you to react non-violently. Can you respond to that? Cool. So if indeed it does predisposition for you to act more violently, we say this is keeping you in prison and for you to go to prison, which brings me to my second issue. What is the utility of keeping individuals in jail? Because she said it's very simple. If you can set specialized rehabilitation and we can treat them as people who have a predisposition that are treated differently, we do that. But here's the thing, it's not like we're going to prison them for there's rehabilitation in prison, but who is under the cloud of a criminal? You will have full guilt when you enter. You have to treat you as an individual who should correct the way he views society, not a person who has no control and is a victim of society. So we think that rehab will still exist under the model anyway. But the difference is we would want him to spend more time. We would want him to spend more time in rehabilitation. We think he should actually be there for a longer time for him to access those moralities, so he could be able to benefit from it. So if you believe these people do not have the capacity to access these moralities or this predisposition, why you let them not go to jail and not access the rehabilitation for a longer time? We would rather than access it under our system. But if that's the case, Mr. Speaker, if you don't send them to jail and you don't have people, what happens then? What happens to people in society who think you're sacrificed? It's not true, Gemma, that these people with you as individuals who are not in the state is complicit in accepting such a narrative. If that's true, then what happens is society will never be able to engage with this person. So there are two scenarios that come out of this. Either A, that person actually believes he has no control and therefore has no capacity to access the moral compass of society, which means considering it exists, no one to act on it or to actively oppose his gene. More likely, he's going to isolate himself. He's not going to be involved in society. Nobody's going to appreciate him, or even worse, they are not going to treat him as a human being. So yes, we will treat him as a criminal, a person who has been corrected, gone to jail, and come out. We think there will be discrimination, but it will be lesser than a person who is inherently evil, who should go to rehabilitation and spend time there. It's not deterrent. We are not locking him up by the virtue of him having a gene, as Gemma says. We are locking him for acting on those genes, because we argue there's no such thing as perfect control, but there is the capacity of individuals to access a moral compass, even if it's less likely. We think it's equivalent to an average individual on the ground. People who also suffer the same circumstances for instance. So in concluding this debate, it might be true that they have lesser control over the average individual, but that does not mean there's a no utility, but be it any different from any other individual. We think if your capacity to access a moral compass is the same, and if indeed there's a predisposition and it's less likely for you to act violently, that does not mean you should do it, or society has a different deterrent to it. But lastly, I'll do this is, we don't think they're psychopaths. And if Behra's speech told you, it is true, not defined by gene. If you're not defined by your gene, and control is not defined based on gene, it's defined by the environment you are in. So having a predisposition does not negate your environment with a lack of gene, and therefore you have the active duty to oppose it. I'm speaking up.
We thank the deputy of opposition. Next, we have the government whip. Here.
What we're proposing is we will reduce the sentence for these people because society won't like them once they leave prison if they suffer a lesser sentence. And we should only imprison every individual who's maybe gay, they consider developed by the society that the society doesn't like. Because that's the better. But then again, they have two different benchmarks for genes. In the gay gene, it's perfectly fine. But it's a criminal gene, no, you are responsible for it. The difference is this. If you were not held responsible for your gay gene, it means the government, or rather if we hold the same standard, the government should not ever incorporate equality because the government society is your homosexual and not such. The gene that makes it, the government is not responsible for giving you equal rights. You should suffer the full brunt of what society wants to give to you. That's what they're suggesting, but it's just we don't recognize the gay gene. The biggest problem with them is that they fail to recognize the compounding impact of the gene. That's the first aspect of the analysis of this debate. How does the gene affect what you do as a criminal? Their response is no, still have control. And our response to that was this: control isn't an absolute concept. Either have none of it or all of it. And it was aptly recognized when they said there's no such thing as perfect control. Exactly. That's why we're happy to recognize mitigating factors. This sentence, in any other circumstance where you can prove that you had a reduced amount of control when you made that decision, where your incentives to make a criminal decision are much higher and far outweigh your incentive to make a criminal decision. In this case, incentive, it is something you have absolutely no control over, something that manifests in a physiological form upon you that you literally cannot control. The other response to this is no. We should stick to a purely utilitarian model. Our response to that was this: a utilitarian model in this particular case, or generally, is problematic because that pushes us to imprison every single individual with a criminal, with a crime because of their gene, just for a while. But perpetuity for A, because they have control over their decision, but they'll commit crime anyway, because they have no control over the decision. Second, because society does not like these individuals. It's highly problematic. So utilitarian response. So what standard should we utilize in this case? As Gemma told you, we utilize the standard of a balance. A balance between the right of the potential victim not to be harmed and the society to stay, and your right as an individual for you to be discriminated against by something you have no control over. Before I continue, yes.
We're literally thinking about the value of 6 years, given that's what the mitigation are. I just want to know what is the significant value of that 6 years, or at least what outcome of your case. Yeah. Please show me the technical component, the principle that you have.
So now time in prison doesn't matter. No such thing as prison, no such thing as bad prison. Let's shove everyone in prison because 6 years doesn't matter. Because that's the judge was asking. If it's only 6 years, the impact that is principle and value. The fact that the government becomes actively discriminatory towards an individual with no control or partial control over their actions. That's the question here in the debate. So here are a couple of things that they did. First, they told us that it is true for this individual to enter prison or to be rehabilitated for a period of time because that's what rehabilitation is contingent on, because you reject the concept of morality in society. We responded in a couple of ways. First, we told that this individual is not rejecting the morals of society. It's probably the 10th time in this. This individual rejects, or rather accepts, the morality of society and the collective pool of morality, has access to it, but unfortunately is unable to fully exercise their perception of agreeing with that morality at the point where the gene expresses or manifests itself. I think Gemma gave you sufficient examples of this, but here's another example. If I have pneumonia and I happen to be in a clinic to a baby, the baby is most likely, or rather the baby is most likely to be a disease that will exacerbate my pneumonia. But if I'm an individual next to in a hospital, next to a baby who's sick, but I don't have pneumonia, I probably get sick. The person with pneumonia's fault that illness from the child because they can't actually control pneumonia. What the government can help individuals who are often stigmatized because we not issue of genetics in society. The government can, instead of shoving things in procedures, send through programs that will help them understand the expression of this. And that's what we want. Because when the discussion itself is initiated on mitigating the sense of the individual on the basis of a genetic predisposition, it's a discussion about how this individual could legitimately have alternative means of rehabilitation. And their intention to that, if you declare this person as an individual who has a genetic predisposition, society will not like them, and therefore will be higher. But then the contrary actually occurs. Because when you commit a crime, society assumes you willfully and with full knowledge infringe on the rights of that society. But when society is out of control, the result is society is more likely to be sympathetic towards you. Especially when the state not only shoves you into prison, but actually provides you means that help you in recovering as an individual and assisting you in controlling this. So not only are you a product of the prison system, but actually go out and say, I've actually gone through treatment and I better understand how to mitigate this gene that caused me to be a criminal. That's what actually happens. Second, their problem was, no, these individuals have committed a crime and they must be declared guilty. They are declared guilty because we're mitigating the sentence, not the guilt. What does happen is that this individual is evaluated, or the degree of guilt is evaluated, in which we don't mitigate this individual. That is what I popularity. Yeah. Okay. So let's sort of wrap up with a very good example, and they still fail to respond to. The system already differentiates between individuals who commit crime with premeditation and individuals who commit without premeditation. The difference there is, on one hand, an individual made a calculated, rational, intended decision to hurt another. On the other hand, it was as a circumstances that are together to lead to the unfortunate outcome, which might be death. In these two instances, we value the intent as something that puts you in prison for a short period of time. And that's the discussion in this very thing. Individuals who or whose circumstances are compounded by a gene should be recognized that they have a lesser amount of control and thereby A, give them appropriate treatment, but more importantly, actually not shoved in prison for a longer period of time. We yes. With that, we are proud to propose.
We thank the Gov Whip. Next, we invite Op Whip. Okay.
Two issues in this debate. Firstly, these individuals have a lesser extent of culpability, therefore granting them a repeated sentence. And secondly, what's the impact of the court ruling
segments. First, they are proof to you that these people don't have a extent of culpability and absolutely culpable as much as we are when committing the same crime. We as people don't have it. We agree to two things. We agree that Jean may give you a more aggressive character. We agree that these people did not choose that regime. But what else always operated onto our bench was that we operated on the basis that everyone has the same understanding of the world and what consequences their action will bring upon itself. And I'll put that later. Hold on. These individuals have the same controls as everyone else. Even in their best case, where they say it's more difficult for them to control as well, this was somewhat neutral. Came to our bench when we said that the laws that you access somewhat help neutralize these things at the very least. Even that, right? Let's understand what mindset you operate under. Even if these people are people who have the criminal gene. When you're about to throw a punch to that man's throat, you generally consider whether or not your anger should take precedence over me being just if you feel true to throw that punch towards that man's throat, you send towards 10 years in prison, regardless of whether you have the criminal gene or not. Because the testosterone will still activate regardless. Even if I, as an individual, was angry as much, the testosterone will be activated in me and I'll still want to throw that punch. But it's whether or not to consent to that 10 years or not. Even if I have the criminal gene and I want to go back, that's perfectly fine. If I do not go back, I can consent towards the 10 years. And the trade-off was that, and people, they agreed, they said, they agreed that people understood the laws, people understood they'll be in prison by throwing that face. So they consented fully for the punishment. They are absolutely cool in this situation. But also that, according to Vera's speech, there's a certain trigger environment that happens where it's conducive for you to commit it. So these people that in some conducive environment means an environment will somewhat to commit a crime. It's not just a case where people will just generally throw punches and have criminal gene. It's somewhat a more conducive area compared to other areas to commit a crime. So if I'm an average individual without the criminal gene, and I walk into a dark alley, and I somewhat am tempted to commit a crime by stealing someone's money, we think that trigger environment would still apply to someone's gene. So the environment is the same. The way that the court now has calculated that is how the judgment was. And that's extremely hard to say. The judgment will be clouded because it's conducive for you to commit a crime. It's easy for you to get away with the crime if you commit a crime. Then, so it's at this exact circumstance where the environment is same, the laws you apply to you, and you understand and consent towards the harm to be, culpability applies to you there. So everyone suffers from the same trigger environment and the same judgment. Yes.
Okay. Is it as easy for someone who chemically suffers from depression to avoid committing suicide as it is for someone who has no chemical imbalance?
Yeah, it is. Because, like I said, everyone has access to education, towards the media, which helps you committing suicide. Not everyone has access towards those things. Then you say that there's a trigger environment for committing suicide. And the exact trigger environment for you to commit suicide will apply to every individual as well. How clouded your judgment was at a situation cannot be measured by the court. So the court can't tangibly adjudicate that. This different clouded judgment was severely more than anyone else for a definite mitigated sentence. Under those circumstances, it cannot be that these people do not have culpability whatsoever. Even if they do, it cannot be to that extent because individuals somewhat suffer from the same result and are suffering under the same laws or benefiting from the same laws at the end of the day. So let's go then to the impact or utility of this problem. Is there an actual utility to this? They said in Mustafa's speech that people will be more sympathetic with these individuals when they commit a crime. They'll understand that you have no control compared to some control. But really, is this really true? People will be absolutely scared to be with someone who they believe has no control over their actions according to the court's ruling, where they can absolutely assassinate you anytime. And this may be irrational beliefs, which are absolutely false, absolutely ridiculous. But beliefs that people operate under the court's ruling. The court will tell them these people have no control or have less control than everyone else. If you are with them at the end of the day under their side, if you are with them at the end of the day, you are at danger, or you are somewhat higher probability of a victim of a crime under that circumstance compared to someone who has some control and has been rehabilitated by the prison because it doesn't have a gene which operates under this manner, right? So because of that, we think people will be less pathetic, or even if they think to be absolutely afraid of socializing these people, which is really harmful towards the assimilation of people as well. No. And then we test that came out from Andre as well. That wasn't on stuff, right? People they censor themselves from the society because they believe they themselves are a threat. They overcompensate because of the court rulings.
They believe they are such a danger that they refuse to go out. No, sorry, they refuse to go out of their house. They refuse to be a threat to other people or be a threat to someone else's life because they believe in the lie or they believe in the fact that somehow I at the end will create some more harm to other people because I have no hope when actually they do. At the end of the day, these people will not meet others and their soul will be siphoned out of them and the humanity will be siphoned out of them because they refuse to socialize because the court tells them that people are absolutely perfect for the last one.
Okay, so you're afraid people now work by their rating or something, and the alternative is to put them in jail for the glorious time to socialize.
So no, this is pre-committing a crime, whether individuals would actually want to commit a crime or actually want to be a threat to people, right? So this is not after committing a crime, it's not upon that is being ruled out, right? So talking about people pre-committing a crime, what is their mindset upon the court's ruling on someone with a crime with a criminal charge that this is something that's harmful, right? People operate in the mindset when they overcompensate and believe that I'm a threat now because everyone with this sort of criminal change is a threat with everyone else. They have no control or little control. According to the court, I refuse to be that threat. At the end of the day, the probability is this, right? If everyone operates under the same moral code, if everyone is under the same law, and everyone makes the same trade-offs as the individual who had the energy when he was to throw that punch or about to kick someone or assault someone, right? This is the trade-off that they made. They made a and consented versus punishment being inflicted upon them or suffering under that punishment. If they made that trade-off, you cannot under-penalize them for committing that trade-off and agreeing towards for satisfying their day. If this was true, at the end of the day, these people are absolutely culpable for their crimes. These people should not be mitigated or sent for things they agreed to begin with. Very bad for
With next, we invite all presented by speech.
Mr. Speaker, this debate was if there is partial control, should there be partial guilt? If there is full control, should there be full guilt? Say you are fully culpable, considering that what counts your judgment differs from every individual to another, and your gene, even if it's within the calculus, cannot be a comparative advantage in you not getting a set. Because we cannot determine why an individual being more colored than another person if it is as pervasive the scenario or these circumstances. So the first issue is the effect each individual and actually that crime. But what impact has to be either a technical jail or send them. So the first question you must ask. There is a spectrum of control that exists in humans. But we see that spectrum is not perfect on any scenario. A person who is poor, who did not have access to anything but the bread and the noodles. Or an individual who had that gene but decided to act on it. No individual has perfect control considering the different scenarios that he must ascertain. But what does the individual have over? He has control over societies and administering of companies. Which means tell you it's the same sentence you will get hurting the same individual you will. So your gene might your gene does not discount the rational calculation when you did count the moral judgment. So sure, when you are going to commit that crime, you are more violent. That does not mean I told you was wrong. You are any special than the other individual. So we think in assessing how valuable those moral compasses is to you, we think that person is assessing as such to which they say you can exercise. It's not that they hate. We say if indeed you're going to hurt a person and you're going to harm them, and anger clouds your judgment. That is true for every individual. You might get angry with an agent, but a person who gets angry nonetheless does it with a criminal. But nonetheless, a person who does not get angry faster is going to do it anyway. So then what becomes determined? In that cloud of judgment, if the speaker who still has the capacity to say no, it will be limited by different circumstances, and different circumstances exist across the board. But that doesn't mean your guilt is partial. That means your principle should have been full, and therefore you should be fully. In which they said, let court adjudicate it. Courts can adjudicate that anyway, but we think the precondition to adjudicating should not be that things become a mitigating factor. It should be the determinant of that. You might be irrational when you committed that crime, but when you access the compass of society, you were not, and therefore we think it does not have control over you. So we think this person is fully culpable in that sense. But let's talk about impacts. It is true on both sides we have discrimination. But it is true, Mr. Speaker, if I know you are a malicious individual, gone to jail and come out somehow corrected, they are more likely to accept you. As opposed to a person who's a silent killer. It is inherent within him that he's going to hurt my family. I don't know when he's going to do it. Even in fact, he doesn't know when he's going to do it. So I can't blame him. I can't blame anyone. So what I do, we can rehabilitate him as well. We can tell him that if he clown judgment like every other criminal who did manslaughter or premeditated murder before, you should have not done it anyway. But the point at which you treat them differently, you treat them as individuals who have no access to morality, we think there's a different mechanics of people who operate on that, or your impacts are massively damaged. So even if we cannot prove that this person is fully irrational, we think the impacts are massively harmful, so we would rather send them to jail and treat them people who are fully rational. Therefore, when they come out, they are not seen as malicious, they are not seen as harmful. It's not pneumonia. If you would want to parallel to pneumonia, the person should not have gone to that school when he knows he's going to harm another individual. We think that's the same calculus this operates on. If you know you're aggressive and you have access to the knowledge of society about pneumonia and how, then you should not act upon it. That parallel is exactly the same. We think in that adjudicated Mr. Speaker, you might be irrational to some extent, clouded when you committed a harm. When society told you was wrong, you were fully culpable for it, therefore you should fully be punished. I'm really proud.
To thank the op for the reply speech. Next, invite Goff to present the reply speech.
Conclusions debate, I can show one thing, and the conclusion is respondent. The way to respond to nuanced analysis is not to pretend the nuance doesn't exist and to engage with the worst possible version of that argument. So at the conclusion of that kind of rude statement, their position in this way is that you as an individual can overcome your physiology, which is like really noble in its intent, but ultimately unsupported by any facts or any logic in this debate. Two questions. First, are you principally or should we account for the pressures you face? And secondly, would this be a good outcome? So first up, on the principle, I'm realistic, right, in terms that these people have different levels of control in terms of decision making than other people. So what is their argument? Their argument is because everybody suffers different pressures, we should recognize none of them. But actually, it's the logical conclusion from the truistic statement that there are many different things that pressure people to committing crimes. So if we accept many different things that reduce your culpability or reduce your capacity to avoid committing a crime, why is the logical conclusion that we just forget all of them, rather than we account for all of them in sentencing you for a crime, which is our proposal in this debate, which I think just from like saying it sounds a lot more sensible as a way to engage. And the reason why I think you want to account for all of them as opposed to none of them is because the premise of the criminal justice system in the way that it awards punishment to crimes is that punishment ought to be proportional to the amount of culpability that you had in order to ensure the best possible outcome for people in society. To give you a really clear example that they never responded to, which is why do we punish people who commit crimes in a premeditated way more than we commit, crimes that are in the heat of the moment? And the reason for that actually responds to the rest of their analysis. It's because the rational decision that apparently everybody makes when they commit a crime is less rational when it happens in the context of testosterone, or in the context of rage, or in the context of a particular set of circumstances time that are premeditated in advance. We give a plethora of examples like bad syndrome, like various kinds of mitigating factors we account for now, and the response is just to say, well, we don't support those things without ever giving a principled reason why somebody who's going to, and essentially we say to commit a crime to an extent should be punished in the same way that someone can face that. Ultimately, the only real analysis here is education sufficient. You want morality, and therefore your choice to not do what is moral is a choice. But again, the argument is circular. If it's less of a choice, then why is it that you knowing what is right or wrong changes the fact that you do not act in the same way that somebody else would face that same set of I don't know. So ultimately, the conclusion of their principle is that it's either circular or that it's truistic. Let's talk about whether or not it's futile, because that's pretty much what they fell back on. But in terms of societal perception, they want to be really extreme here and say that if you're a psychopathic killer, everybody is more likely to be afraid of you than if you're just a guy who did the wrong thing but is going to jail. We're not going to concede that. That's the reason why psychopathic killers stay in jail for forever if you don't let that. The actual question was, how would society perceive someone who committed a crime and is put in jail for 5 years, but we know didn't do it because they disagree with morality, and therefore are more likely to try to avoid committing that crime again in the future because they agree with distinct from somebody who knows the morality and has no questions but continues to commit the crime anyway. That was the comparative. Conscious society would probably prefer that first person because they would necessarily be more likely to engage in rehab because they don't want to commit crimes at all because they actually believe the crimes are bad. So the question of societal perception, we won. On the question of rehabilitation, we won. Because the only analysis they offer is that prison also provides you the rehabilitation that you get outside of prison. But the question is incentives. Why would the state rehabilitate you for the genetic predispositions you have if the state has accepted that those predispositions don't matter and that they don't cause your crime? You didn't get the same rehabilitation at the end of this debate. You got worse rehabilitation, you got worse societal perception, and most importantly, you got zero justice. That's why we won the debate.
All right, that concludes the debate. Debaters, please shake hands, and the results announced later sometime.